Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, let us leave behind the noise of the modern world and return to ancient India, to a time when the Buddha walked from place to place, teaching the Dhamma to those who came to hear him. But according to the early Buddhist discourses, not all of those who came were human. There were nights when Devas, celestial beings from realms beyond ordinary human sight, approached the Buddha. Some came from Tāvatimsa, the heaven ruled by Sakka. Others came from different celestial realms, sometimes traveling great distances simply to ask the Buddha a question. And this raises a remarkable question. Why would celestial beings come to a human teacher? They possessed lives far longer than ours. Some lived in realms of extraordinary beauty and happiness. Some possessed powers that human beings could scarcely imagine. Yet they still came to the Buddha seeking understanding. The reason becomes clear when we understand what the Buddha taught about the heavenly realms. Devas are not eternal gods. They are not creators of the universe. Their lives, however long and magnificent, are still conditioned by karma. When their causes are exhausted, their heavenly existence also comes to an end. They too remain within samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death. The Buddha, however, had discovered a path leading beyond that cycle. So these encounters were not stories of gods coming to worship another god. They were encounters between beings still caught within conditioned existence and one who had awakened to the way beyond it. Tonight, we will listen to 10 of those encounters, drawing from the early Buddhist discourses preserved in the Nikayas. 10 encounters, 10 questions. And behind each one, a teaching that is not only for Devas, it is also for us. So settle into stillness, let the day gradually fall away, and listen quietly. Our journey begins on a night when a visitor from another realm came before the Buddha. Story 1. Sahampati requests the Buddha to teach. The night of the Buddha's awakening was unlike any other night in the history of the world. The air around the Bodhi tree was still. The forest of Aruvula had grown quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Above, the full moon of the Vaisakha season hung in the sky, casting a pale light across the earth. And beneath that tree, a man sat motionless. A man who had just completed a journey that no human being had ever completed before. He had sat down in the evening as Siddhartha Gautama, a wandering ascetic seeking liberation through extreme self-denial. He rose as the Buddha, the awakened one, having discovered for himself the truth that liberates all beings from suffering. He had seen clearly the nature of suffering, traced it to its origin in craving and attachment, understood that it could be brought to an end, and found the path that leads to that ending. Yet, as the first stars appeared in the sky that night, the Buddha did not rise. He remained seated. The early texts tell us that he considered something important. The Dhamma he had realized was profound. It was subtle. It was not easily seen, not easily understood, not easily grasped by minds still heavy with the dust of attachment and ignorance. He looked out at the world and saw beings moving through their lives, caught in desires, consumed by anxieties, unable to see beyond the conditions of their existence. The thought arose in his mind. The texts tell us, this Dhamma that I have discovered is hard to see. If I were to teach it, others might not understand. Perhaps it would be better to remain in silence, to let this truth rest within me and go no further. We must be careful here. The Buddha was not afraid. He was not uncertain. He was not confused about what he had discovered. The Dhamma was clear to him, certain, complete. What he considered was simply this: the difficulty of communication. How does one put into words a truth that exists beyond the ordinary range of human understanding? How does one speak to beings whose minds are covered by defilement? The night deepened. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, contemplating this question, and for a time, silence filled the space between the awakened one and the world. It was then that something extraordinary happened. In the higher realms of existence, far above the human world, a Brahma named Sahampati was aware of what was occurring. Brahmās are beings of extraordinary power and longevity who dwell in the highest reaches of the celestial world. They are beings of deep concentration, beings who have achieved states of meditative absorption that most beings cannot imagine. Sahampati was not just any Brahma. He was a Brahma of great distinction, one who had understanding beyond ordinary celestial beings. And he saw, with the clarity that comes from long practice, that a crisis was unfolding. If the Buddha were to remain in silence, the world would be without the teaching. Beings would continue to wander in ignorance, caught in the cycle of birth and death, without guidance, without the Dhamma that could set them free. The opportunity that had arisen with this awakening was so rare, so precious, that if it were lost, it might not come again for a very long time. Sahampati understood that he had to act. He descended from his realm, passed through the lower heavens, and made his way toward the human world. The journey from the Brahmā worlds to the earth is not one of physical distance. It is a journey of different levels of existence, different dimensions of being. Yet for Sahampati, this passage was immediate. He arrived at the Bodhi tree as the night was at its deepest. The Buddha was still seated in meditation. Sahampati approached, and the early texts describe that he paid homage to the awakened one, bowing, showing the respect that is due to one who has achieved what no other has achieved. Having done so, he stood before the Buddha and spoke. The request that Sahampati made was simple in its words, but immense in its implications. He addressed the Blessed One with deep reverence and said, "Venerable Sir, please teach the Dhamma. There are beings in this world whose eyes are not completely covered by the dust of defilement. They are capable of understanding, but they will never hear the Dhamma unless the Tathagata speaks it. Please, Venerable Sir, teach the Dhamma. There are beings who will understand." The texts tell us that Sahampati repeated this request. He did not simply speak once and wait. He understood the weight of the moment, and so he asked again. He asked a second time. He asked a third time. "Please teach the Dhamma," he said, "for the sake of the world. There are beings who are ready. They are not beyond hope. They have not fallen so deep into ignorance that they cannot see the truth when it is shown to them. But they need to hear it. Without a teacher, without the spoken word, they will remain as they are, wandering, searching, suffering." And the Buddha listened. What happened next is one of the most significant moments in the entire Buddhist tradition. The Buddha looked up. He surveyed the world with what the texts call the Buddha eye, the vision of one who is fully awakened, the capacity to see not just the physical world, but the true nature of all beings. And what he saw was something beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. The Buddha saw beings in the world as lotuses growing in a pond of water. Some of those lotuses were still sunk deep in the mud, not yet risen toward the surface. Some were rising, making their way upward through the water. Some had risen above the water, but had not yet opened, and some had already bloomed, their petals fully expanded in the light. Not all beings were ready. Not all beings would understand. But some were ready. Some had cultivated their minds for lifetimes. Some were only lightly covered by the defilements that blind most beings to the truth. And these, the Buddha saw, were worthy of the teaching. It is said that at this moment, the Buddha emitted a light. He radiated radiance into the 10 directions, up, down, and across all the worlds, so that beings in every realm could sense that something extraordinary was occurring. The celestial beings in the heavens became aware. The guardians of the directions looked up. Even those in the lowest realms felt something stir in the fabric of existence. The moment had arrived. The Buddha turned to Sahampati and spoke. He agreed to teach. He would go forth into the world and set in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. What is the significance of this moment? Sahampati, a Brahmā, a celestial being of extraordinary power and long life, came before a human being who had just awakened and asked him to speak. Let us reflect on this for a moment. In the cosmology of the early texts, Brahmās are revered as some of the highest beings in existence. They exist in realms of deep peace and stillness. Their lifespans are measured in cosmic ages, yet Sahampati bowed before the Buddha. He recognized that even a Brahmā, even one who had lived for eons, was not yet free. The awakening of the Buddha was something beyond anything that even the Brahmā worlds had achieved. This is the first lesson of our story. The Buddha did not come to save beings from above. He did not descend from a heavenly realm to impose a teaching upon the world. He was a man who awakened, and celestial beings came to him, not the other way around. Sahampati came down from the Brahmā world because he understood that liberation had to be found on earth through a human teacher who had walked the path and emerged on the other side. The second lesson is about the nature of the Dhamma itself. The Buddha hesitated not from weakness, but from wisdom. He saw that the Dhamma is profound, that it cannot be easily grasped by minds still bound to desire. And yet he agreed to teach because he also saw, as Sahampati pointed out, that there are beings in the world who are ready. Not everyone, not most, perhaps, but some, and for those some, the teaching would be enough. Sahampati's request echoes across the centuries. There are beings in this world whose eyes are not completely covered. There are those who, if they hear the Dhamma, will understand. This is the faith that lies at the heart of Buddha's teaching. We do not teach because everyone will understand. We teach because some will. And those some, whoever they are, wherever they are, whether human or celestial, will find their way to liberation. The Buddha rose from the Bodhi tree that night. He would soon set out for Isipatana, where he would deliver his first discourse to 5 ascetics who had also been searching for the truth. But before that first human audience, there was Sahampati. There was a Brahmā who had come down from the heavens to ask a simple question. Will you teach? And the Buddha answered yes. As we close this encounter, we might ask ourselves, what would have happened if Sahampati had not come? The texts suggest that the Buddha would have remained in silence, not forever perhaps, but long enough for the world to remain without the teaching for a crucial moment. One celestial being made the difference. One being who understood the importance of the teaching, who was willing to descend and ask, who trusted that the Buddha would answer. This was enough to change the course of history. We are here because someone, somewhere, at some point, heard the Dhamma and understood it, and they passed it on. Sahampati was the first link in that chain. He asked the Buddha to speak. The Buddha spoke, and the wheel began to turn. May we listen as carefully as Sahampati listened. May we ask as boldly as he asked. And may we, like him, recognize that the teaching, when it is spoken, has the power to reach any being, in any realm, at any time. Story 2. The Buddha subdues Brahmā Baka. Some time after his awakening, the Buddha was dwelling at Jeta's Grove, the monastery in the Savatthi countryside that had been offered to him by the wealthy patron Anathapindika. The days passed in the familiar rhythm of monastic life, with the Buddha teaching the Dhamma to monks, laypeople, and visitors who came from near and far to hear him speak. But the Buddha did not spend all his time in the human world. The early texts tell us that he would sometimes travel to other realms, ascending to the heavens to teach beings who could not easily come to him. On one particular occasion, the Buddha decided to visit the Subdues realm. This was not an ordinary journey. The Subdues is one of the highest of the 16 Brahmā worlds, a realm of beings who have achieved extraordinary states of meditative absorption. The beings who dwell there are known as Subdues Brahmās, and their existence is marked by a profound sense of joy and equanimity that arises from their deep immersion in concentration. Their lifespans are vast beyond human comprehension, measured not in years, but in cosmic ages. And at the time of our story, this realm was ruled by a Brahmā named Baka. The name Baka is sometimes translated as pigeon or bird. though in the context of this story, it carries a deeper meaning. This Brahmā had come to believe that he was eternal. He believed that his realm was the highest possible, that his existence was without end, that nothing existed beyond the boundaries of his own experience. This belief had taken root over countless lifetimes, strengthened by the very depth of his meditative attainment. When one has spent eons in a state of profound peace, it is easy to mistake that peace for permanence. The Buddha arrived at the Subdues realm as the afternoon of the human world was turning toward evening. He came not with fanfare or dramatic display, but quietly, as one who had every right to be there. And as he entered the realm, something remarkable occurred. The other Brahmās who were present, beings of great power and long life, inhabitants of this highest heaven, saw the Buddha approaching, and one by one they vanished. They disappeared from the realm, unable or unwilling to remain in the presence of the Tathagata. The early texts tell us that they vanished because they were unable to bear the radiance of the awakened one, unable to withstand the power of one who had gone beyond all worldly states. Only Baka remained. Baka did not flee because he believed with absolute certainty that his realm was supreme. He believed that he was eternal, all-pervading, everlasting. He believed that nothing could exist beyond his realm, and therefore there was nothing to fear from a visitor, however extraordinary that visitor might seem. So he stood his ground. He remained, and he faced the Buddha with the confidence of one who has never known uncertainty. The encounter that followed was unlike any other teaching the Buddha had given. He did not begin with a discourse on suffering or the path. He did not speak of karma or rebirth or the Four Noble Truths. Instead, he asked a question. One simple question. Baka, the Buddha said, "Do you see the realm of the 33 heavens, the Tāvatimsa, from here?" Baka considered this. The Tāvatimsa is a lower realm, home to the Deva king Sakka and countless celestial beings. It is a place of great beauty and long life, but compared to the Subdues, it is coarse, ordinary, limited. And Baka answered honestly, "I do not see it." The Buddha nodded. He asked again, "Do you see the Yama heaven from here?" This was another lower realm, a place of celestial beings who experience pleasure but are not yet free from the cycle of existence. Baka considered. "I do not see it." "Do you see the Tusita heaven?" "I do not see it." "The Nimanarati heaven?" "I do not see it." "The Paranimitavasavati heaven?" "I do not see it." One by one, the Buddha asked about the realms that lay below the Subdues, and one by one, Baka answered that he could not see them. The higher one rises in concentration, the more the lower realms fade from awareness. This is the nature of meditative absorption. Each higher state eclipses the one below it, until the practitioner dwells in a realm of such subtlety that nothing coarser can be perceived. But the Buddha was not finished. He continued to ask about realms above the Subdues. He asked about the Ahenyanyasata realm, where beings exist without consciousness at all. He asked about realms of pure form and realms of formlessness. He asked about states of existence that Baka had never encountered, heights of attainment that he had never reached. And to each of these questions, Baka answered the same way, "I do not see it." The Buddha's questions formed a pattern that Baka, despite his certainty, could not fail to recognize. With each question, the Buddha was demonstrating something fundamental. Baka believed himself to be eternal, to be all-pervading, to be the highest possible being. But the Buddha's questions revealed that Baka's realm was, in fact, limited. He could not see below him. He could not see above him. His experience was bounded by the depth of his own attainment, and that attainment, however profound, was not infinite. Then the Buddha turned to the other Brahmās, those who had vanished when he arrived. He asked them a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Do you see the Subdues realm, the realm where Baka dwells, from here?" These Brahmās had remained in a realm just above the Subdues. They had not fled from the Buddha's presence because they had gone even higher. And when the Buddha asked them about Baka's realm, They answered, "We do not see it." So it was that the Buddha demonstrated the truth that Baka could not see the realms above him, and the Brahmās above could not see Baka's realm. Each was trapped within the boundaries of their own experience, each believing themselves to be supreme, each blind to the existence of what lay beyond their own attainment. At this point, Baka fell silent. He could not answer. His certainty had been shaken, not by force or by argument, but by the simple, undeniable fact that he could not see what the Buddha was describing. And in that silence, the Buddha began to teach. He spoke about the nature of existence. He spoke about the cycles of expansion and contraction that the world undergoes over vast periods of time. He explained that there have been 36 periods of world expansion and 36 periods of world contraction, and that in each of these cycles, beings arise and pass away according to their karma. Baka, he pointed out, had not always existed. Baka would not always exist. His belief in his own eternity was an illusion, a beautiful, profound illusion born of deep concentration, but an illusion nonetheless. The teaching that emerged from this encounter was clear and uncompromising. Even the highest Brahmā realm, even the most refined state of meditative absorption, even the belief in one's own eternity, all of these are impermanent. All of them arise through conditions, all of them are subject to change, and all of them will eventually pass away. When the Buddha finished teaching, something happened that illustrates the power of the Dhamma over even the most established views. Baka the Brahmā, who had believed himself eternal, who had held sway over the Subdues realm for cosmic ages, found that he could not reply. His certainty was gone, and the other Brahmās, seeing what had occurred, vanished as well. The Subdues realm, which had seemed so solid, so permanent, so supreme, it remained, but the Lord who had claimed it was no longer the same. The Buddha returned to the human world that evening. He came back to Jeta's grove, and when the monks asked him where he had been, he told them. He described the encounter with Baka, the questions he had asked, the teaching he had given. Why did he share this story? Because, as the early texts tell us, the Devas cannot report back to the human world. Celestial beings may visit the Buddha, but they cannot return to their realms and announce what they have heard. So it fell to the Buddha himself to bring the teaching to those who remained below, to the monks, the lay people, and all who would listen. Let us reflect on what this story teaches. Baka represents something that is deeply familiar to all of us. We all, at some point, believe that we have found the highest truth. We all, at some point, mistake a temporary peace for permanent liberation. We all, at some point, believe that our current understanding is complete, that there is nothing beyond what we have already experienced. The Buddha's method here was not to argue or to convince. It was to ask questions. By asking Baka what he could see, the Buddha revealed the limits of Baka's experience. And by revealing those limits, he opened the door to something greater. Baka could not see below him because he had risen above. He could not see above him because he had not yet risen high enough. Each state of understanding, however refined, is bounded by the conditions that gave rise to it. The lesson is not that the Brahmā worlds are worthless. The lesson is that even the highest worldly state is not the final truth. Concentration can bring peace. Meditation can bring clarity. But neither concentration nor meditation, however deep, can replace the wisdom that comes from seeing things as they truly are. The wisdom that arises when the causes of suffering are fully understood and fully abandoned. Baka was not a villain. He was a being of extraordinary attainment, a being who had cultivated his mind for eons. But his belief in eternity was a form of attachment, the most subtle and refined form of attachment imaginable. And the Buddha, with a single question, showed him that even that attachment must eventually be let go. May we, like the Buddha, have the clarity to see the limits of our own understanding. May we have the humility to recognize that there are realms we have not yet seen. And may we continue to practice, to deepen, to open ourselves to the truth that lies beyond all views, all beliefs, all claims of supremacy, until even the highest attainment gives way to the peace that has no opposite. Story 3. Moggallāna goes to the Tāvatimsa heaven. Among all the disciples of the Buddha, there were two who stood apart as the chief disciples, the two who were recognized as the Buddha's closest companions in teaching and practice. One was Sāriputta, renowned for his wisdom, for his ability to penetrate the deepest teachings and explain them with clarity that even ordinary minds could grasp. The other was Moggallāna, and he was renowned for something quite different. Moggallāna was known as the great miracle worker, the disciple whose mastery of meditation had given him powers that most beings, human or celestial, could scarcely imagine. These powers were not arbitrary. They arose from the depth of his meditative practice, from the concentration he had cultivated through years of diligent training under the Buddha's guidance. According to the early texts, Moggallāna had achieved the ability to travel through the air, to pass through solid objects, to multiply his body, to appear and disappear at will, to visit other realms of existence, and to see beings in those realms as clearly as one sees the world around us. These abilities are known in the Buddhist tradition as iddhi, sometimes translated as psychic powers or supernatural abilities. But we must understand what the early texts are telling us here. These powers were not the goal of Moggallāna's practice. They were side effects, so to speak, of the deep concentration he had developed. The Buddha himself had achieved such powers during his own training, and he had warned his disciples that powers, however extraordinary, do not lead to liberation. Liberation comes only from wisdom, from the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, from the destruction of craving and attachment. Powers can be useful. They can help a teacher, they can inspire faith, they can protect the innocent, but they are not the destination. Moggallāna understood this. He used his powers not for his own glory, but in service of the teaching. And on the occasion we are about to consider, his powers would bring the Dhamma to beings who otherwise might never have encountered it. One day, as Moggallāna sat in meditation, his mind turned toward the celestial realms. He had developed the ability to travel to other worlds simply by directing his concentration, by willing himself to be elsewhere. He had visited the Brahmā realms before. He had visited the realm of the hungry ghosts and the animal realms. He had gone wherever his powers could take him, often to observe the conditions of beings in those realms and to learn what he could about the working of karma. On this particular occasion, Moggallāna decided to visit the Tāvatimsa heaven. Tāvatimsa is the realm of the 33, the celestial world ruled by the Deva king Sakka, a being of great power and long life who had, according to tradition, been a devoted follower of the Buddha. The Tāvatimsa heaven is one of the most beautiful realms in existence. It is filled with magnificent palaces, serene gardens, radiant beings who experience pleasure and happiness far beyond anything available in the human world. The Devas who dwell there are not subject to the hardships of human life. They do not suffer from cold or hunger, from illness or injury. Their lives are long, their pleasures refined, their existence comfortable. Moggallāna ascended through the levels of existence until he arrived at the Tāvatimsa realm. He passed through the lower heavens, moved through the atmosphere, and emerged in the celestial world as easily as one might walk through an open door. When he arrived, he saw something that surprised him, though perhaps it should not have. Thousands of Devas had gathered together. This was unusual. The Devas of Tāvatimsa, like all celestial beings, are typically occupied with their own pleasures and pursuits. They do not gather in large assemblies unless something has drawn them together, some matter of common concern. And as Moggallāna looked upon this gathering, he understood why they had come together. They were worried. The Devas of Tāvatimsa had heard about the Buddha and his teaching. They had heard that in the human world there was a being who had awakened to the truth, who taught a Dhamma that could liberate beings from the cycle of birth and death. Some of the Devas had even been fortunate enough to visit the Buddha themselves, to hear him speak, to experience the power of his teaching. And they had come away changed. They had realized that even celestial life, however beautiful and long, was not the final answer. They had glimpsed something beyond the heavens, but many of the other Devas had not yet heard the teaching. And what concerned them was something quite specific. They had heard that the Buddha taught certain verses, discourses that offered protection, discourses that could shield a practitioner from harm. These verses are known in the Buddhist tradition as paritta, and they are recited to this day by monks and laypeople alike, often during ceremonies, during times of illness, during moments of danger or uncertainty. The Paritta Suttas are not magical spells in the ordinary sense. They are teachings, words of the Buddha that, when recited with understanding and devotion, create conditions of safety and well-being. The Devas had heard of these protective verses, and they wanted them. They wanted to know what the Buddha taught, what words he offered for those who wished to be protected from harm. But there was a problem. The Devas did not know how to approach the Buddha. They knew that the Buddha dwelt in the human world, that he walked from village to village, from monastery to monastery, that he was accessible to those who came to him. But celestial beings do not easily travel to the human world, and even if they could, they did not know whether the Buddha would welcome them, whether he would teach them, whether the Dhamma was meant for Devas as well as for humans. So they had gathered together to discuss this problem. They talked among themselves, each offering suggestions, each raising concerns. Some thought they should send a representative. Others thought they should wait for another opportunity. Others wondered whether the Buddha would even be interested in teaching celestial beings, or whether his teaching was meant only for humans. The discussion went on, and no resolution was reached. Moggallāna listened to all of this. He had come to the Tāvatimsa realm for his own reasons, but he had arrived at a moment of need. These Devas wanted the teaching, and they did not know how to obtain it. Moggallāna understood immediately what he should do. He approached the assembly and asked them, "What are you discussing?" The Devas turned to him. They recognized him as a disciple of the Buddha, a human being who had somehow arrived in their realm, who possessed powers that even some of them did not have. They explained their problem. They had heard about the Buddha and his protective verses. They wanted to learn, but they did not know whether such learning was possible for beings of their realm. Moggallāna listened carefully. Then he spoke, and his words were simple and direct. He said, "Why do you discuss among yourselves? Go directly to the Buddha. Approach him in the human world, ask your question, and listen to his answer. The Buddha does not turn away any being who comes to him with faith and a genuine desire to learn. Whether you are human or celestial, whether you dwell in the lowest realm or the highest, the Buddha's teaching is available to all who seek it." The Devas were surprised by this answer. They had expected Moggallāna to offer some complicated solution, perhaps to use his own powers to intercede on their behalf. Instead, he gave them the most straightforward advice possible. Go directly to the source. Some of the Devas hesitated. They were celestial beings, accustomed to their own realm, uncertain about traveling to the human world. But others among them were more bold. They had heard stories of Devas who had visited the Buddha, who had been welcomed and taught. They decided to act on Moggallāna's counsel. They descended from the Tāvatimsa realm and made their way to the human world. It is not clear from the early texts exactly how many went or who among them took the first step. What we know is that they went to Jeta's grove, where the Buddha was staying, and they approached him with the question that had been troubling them. "Venerable Sir," they said, or words to this effect, "we have heard that you teach protective verses. We have heard that there are words, discourses from your lips, that can protect those who hear them from harm. We are Devas of the Tāvatimsa heaven, and we wish to receive this teaching. Will you teach us the protective verses?" The Buddha listened, and then he taught. The discourse that followed is recorded in the early texts as one of the Paritta Suttas, one of the protective teachings. The Buddha explained that true protection does not come from rituals or from external objects, but from inner qualities, from the cultivation of virtue, from the practice of loving kindness, from the development of wisdom. He taught verses that reminded practitioners of the transitory nature of existence, verses that called to mind the refuge they had taken in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. He taught verses that cultivated a mind of goodwill toward all beings, a mind that wishes happiness and freedom from suffering for every living creature. The Devas listened, and when the Buddha finished, they were filled with joy. They had received what they came for, not merely words to recite, but a teaching to understand, a path to practice. They bowed to the Buddha in gratitude and reverence, and then they returned to their realm, carrying the Dhamma back with them to the Tāvatimsa heaven. Moggallāna, for his part, had returned to the human world before this teaching took place. He had done what he came to do, not to deliver the teaching himself, but to point the way. He understood that his role was not to be the teacher, but to be the bridge. He had seen the need, and he had guided the Devas to the one who could meet that need. This story carries several important lessons. The first is about the accessibility of the Dhamma. The Buddha's teaching is not limited to human beings. It is not confined to one particular realm or one particular type of being. Anyone who approaches with faith and a genuine desire to learn can receive it. The Devas of Tāvatimsa were celestial beings, beings who had lived for eons in comfort and pleasure, and yet they recognized that something was missing. They had heard that there was a teaching that could bring genuine peace, genuine liberation, and they wanted it. And the Buddha gave it to them. The second lesson is about the nature of protection. The Paritta verses, the protective discourses, are not magical formulas that automatically shield a practitioner from all harm. True protection comes from within. It comes from the cultivation of virtue, from the practice of loving kindness, from the development of wisdom. When the Buddha taught the Devas, he did not give them a spell to recite. He gave them a way of life, a path of practice, a means of transforming their own minds so that they would no longer be slaves to craving and attachment. The third lesson is about the role of teachers and students. Moggallāna could have kept the Devas in their confusion. He could have used his position to gain influence among them, to become their teacher himself. But he did not. He pointed them to the Buddha, to the source of the teaching. This is the role of a true disciple, not to keep the Dhamma for oneself, but to share it, to guide others to the teacher who can give them what they need. As we close this encounter, we might reflect on our own situation. We too are seeking protection, protection from suffering, from uncertainty, from the fear of change and loss. We too have heard that there is a teaching that can help us. And the Buddha's answer, through the centuries, remains the same. Come and listen. Approach with faith and an open heart, and receive what is offered. The teaching is not hidden. It is not reserved for a select few. It is available to all beings, in all realms, at all times. Moggallāna showed the way. The Devas followed, and the wheel of the Dhamma turned once more, bringing the teaching from the human world to the heavens, and from the heavens back to the human world, in an endless cycle of giving and receiving, of teaching and learning, of liberation for all who are ready to receive it. Story 4. Sakka asks about true happiness. Sakka was the lord of the Tāvatimsa heaven, the realm of the 33, and he had been lord for a very long time. According to the early texts, his reign extended over countless cosmic ages, periods of time so vast that the human mind cannot truly comprehend them. He had been born into that realm through the power of his own past actions, through karmas of generosity and virtue that had ripened into a life of extraordinary comfort and power. He dwelt in magnificent celestial palaces surrounded by beautiful parks and gardens. He was attended by thousands of radiant beings who had also been reborn in that realm. His lifespan was measured not in years but in aeons, and when one aeon ended and another began, Sakka remained, his life continuing unbroken through the cycles of existence. In the human world below, Sakka was known by another name. He was called Indra, the king of the gods, and across many cultures and many centuries, countless stories would be told about him. But, in the Buddhist tradition, Sakka was something more than a figure of legend. He was a real being, a celestial being who had encountered the Buddha many times, who had asked questions and received answers, and who had been gradually transformed by the teaching. Sakka was not an arahant. He was not yet liberated from the cycle of birth and death. He was a stream enterer, a being who had entered the path and could not fall back, but who had not yet completed the journey. And because he was not yet fully liberated, he was still subject to certain limitations. He still experienced desire, though it was refined and subtle compared to human desire. He still experienced attachment, though it was less heavy than the attachments of ordinary beings. And he still experienced a kind of suffering that is unique to celestial beings, the suffering that comes from knowing that even a life measured in cosmic ages must eventually end. It was this suffering that brought Sakka to the Buddha on the night of our story. The Buddha was staying at Jeta's Grove, the monastery near Savatthi, and the hour was late. The monastery had grown quiet. The monks had retired to their dwelling places. The only sounds were the gentle movements of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures waking in the darkness. And then, in the midst of this stillness, a visitor arrived. Sakka descended from the Tāvatimsa heaven and made his way to the Buddha. He did not come with a great retinue, or with celestial music, or with any of the displays of power that a king of the gods might be expected to command. He came alone, quietly, as one who wishes not to be noticed, as one who has something serious on his mind. He approached the Buddha and paid homage, bowing his head in the traditional way, acknowledging the supremacy of the awakened one. Then he sat down nearby, and the Buddha acknowledged his presence. There, in the stillness of the night, in the quiet of Jeta's Grove, the conversation began. "Sakka," the Buddha said, recognizing his visitor, "what brings you here at this hour?" And Sakka answered. And his answer was not what one might expect from a king of the gods. He did not speak of battles or celestial politics. He did not speak of the concerns of his realm. He asked a question that had clearly been troubling him for some time, a question that had followed him through countless aeons of existence. "Venerable Sir," Sakka said, "I have been thinking about happiness. I have lived in the Tāvatimsa heaven for a very long time. I have experienced every kind of pleasure that celestial existence can offer. I have gardens of incomparable beauty. I have attendants who anticipate my every need. I have a lifespan so long that mortal beings cannot even conceive of it. And yet, Venerable Sir, I find myself asking, is this happiness? Is the happiness I experience in the Tāvatimsa heaven true happiness? Or is there something greater, something more lasting, something that I have not yet found?" The Buddha listened. He did not answer immediately. He understood that this question, coming from a being like Sakka, was not a casual inquiry. It was the question of someone who had lived deeply, experienced much, and was beginning to see that experience itself was not enough. "Sakka," the Buddha said, "you ask a good question. Let me ask you something in return. Suppose a person in the human world were to live in comfort and security. They would have enough food, enough clothing, enough shelter. They would have family and friends who cared for them. They would be free from illness and danger. Would this person be happy?" Sakka considered. They would be happy, Venerable Sir. Such a person would be happier than most. And now suppose, the Buddha continued, that this person were to become a Deva in the Tāvatimsa heaven. They would have all that they had before and more. They would live far longer. Their pleasures would be far more refined. Would this person be happier still? Yes, Venerable Sir. The happiness of a Deva exceeds the happiness of a human being. And now suppose that this Deva were to be reborn in a higher heaven, and then a higher one still, rising through the levels of celestial existence, experiencing greater and greater pleasures, living longer and longer. Would the happiness increase with each ascent? Sakka paused. This was the heart of his question, and he knew it. It would seem so, Venerable Sir. Each higher realm offers greater happiness than the one below. But the Buddha shook his head gently. You are right, Sakka, and yet you are not right. There is a kind of happiness that increases with ascent. There is a kind of happiness that deepens as one moves to higher and higher realms. But there is also a kind of happiness that does not change, that does not increase or decrease, that does not depend on conditions at all. This happiness, Sakka, is not found in any realm, celestial or otherwise. It is found only when the causes of suffering are completely removed. The Buddha went on to explain. There are, he said, 3 kinds of happiness in the world. The first is the happiness of sense pleasure, kammasukha, the happiness that comes from enjoying pleasant sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and touches. This is the happiness that most beings seek. It is real, but it is coarse, fleeting, and mixed with pain. The moment the pleasant sensation ends, suffering arises. The moment the beloved object is gone, grief follows. The second kind of happiness is the happiness of renunciation. Nekkammasukha, the happiness that comes from letting go, from living simply, from turning away from the endless pursuit of sense pleasure. This happiness is purer than the happiness of sense pleasure. It is stable, not dependent on external conditions, not subject to the same fluctuations. A monk who lives simply, who is content with little, who has renounced the attachments of the household life, experiences a kind of happiness that worldly people cannot easily understand. The third kind of happiness is the happiness of cessation, vosaggasukha, the happiness that comes when the mind is completely liberated, when all the fetters have been broken, when the causes of suffering no longer arise. This is nibbāna itself, the happiness of one who has attained final liberation. It is not a happiness that is experienced as an object of consciousness, because consciousness itself has been transformed. It is the cessation of suffering, and that cessation is peace. Sakka, the Buddha said, you have experienced the first kind of happiness in abundance. The Tāvatimsa heaven offers every conceivable sense pleasure, and you have enjoyed them for countless aeons. But you have also experienced, I suspect, a kind of restlessness, a kind of incompleteness, a sense that even all of this is not enough. This is not a flaw in you. It is the nature of sense pleasure itself. It can never fully satisfy because it is impermanent, because it depends on conditions that will eventually change. Sakka sat in silence. The Buddha's words struck something deep within him, something he had felt but had never quite articulated, even to himself. He had lived in the Tāvatimsa heaven for so long, surrounded by every conceivable pleasure, and yet there had always been, beneath the surface of his existence, a subtle unease. A sense that all of this beauty and comfort was like a beautiful robe worn over an unhealed wound. The robe was lovely, but the wound was still there. Venerable Sir, Sakka asked, is it possible for someone like me to find the third kind of happiness, the happiness of cessation? It is possible, Sakka, the Buddha answered. It is possible for any being in any realm at any time, but it requires something that celestial life does not always cultivate. It requires the willingness to let go completely, not just of sense pleasures, but of the very desire for existence, of the subtle attachment to being someone, to having a self that continues. The Devas of the Tāvatimsa heaven are blessed, but their blessing is a conditional blessing. dependent on the continuation of their realm. When the time comes for that realm to end, as all realms must end, the Devas will be reborn according to their karma. Some will rise higher. Some will fall lower, but none will be free until they have walked the path that you are walking now. Sakka bowed his head. Then I will walk the path, Venerable Sir. I came here tonight seeking an answer, and you have given it to me. I understand now that the happiness I have known, however great, is not the final happiness. There is something beyond, and though I cannot attain it tonight, though I will return to the Tāvatimsa heaven and continue my reign, I will not forget what you have taught me. I will continue to practice. I will continue to draw nearer to the day when the final fetters fall away. The Buddha smiled gently. That is well, Sakka. That is the way of progress. Not sudden leaps, but gradual steps. Not perfection overnight, but steady advancement. You have come far already. You are a stream enterer. You have seen the Dhamma. You have taken refuge. And now you have asked the question that matters most. The answer will come in time, as it comes to all beings who are genuinely seeking. Sakka rose from his seat. He bowed once more to the Buddha, expressing his gratitude, his reverence, his faith, and then, as quietly as he had come, he departed, ascending back through the layers of existence to his celestial realm. But something had changed in him. The restlessness that had troubled him was still there, but it was no longer a source of suffering. It was a motivation, a reminder that the journey was not yet complete. The night deepened over Jeta's grove. The Buddha sat in meditation, and somewhere above, in a realm of extraordinary beauty and pleasure, a king of the gods sat upon his throne and contemplated the teaching he had received. This is what makes the Buddhist cosmos so remarkable. Even beings who have everything, even beings who dwell in realms of unimaginable comfort, recognize that something is missing. They come to the Buddha not because they are suffering in the way that humans suffer, not because they lack food or shelter or companionship, but because they sense, perhaps dimly, perhaps only at certain moments, that existence itself is incomplete, that the cycle of birth and death, however refined and elevated it may become, is not the final answer. The Buddha did not tell Sakka to abandon his realm or renounce his throne. He did not say that celestial existence was worthless. He said something more profound. He said that there is a happiness that transcends all conditions, all realms, all states of existence. And he said that this happiness is available to anyone who genuinely seeks it, whether they are a king of the gods or a wandering ascetic on foot. Sakka returned to his heaven. He continued to rule. He continued to enjoy the pleasures of his realm, but he also continued to practice, to deepen his understanding, to draw ever closer to the liberation that awaited him. And that, perhaps, is the greatest teaching of this encounter. Liberation is not something that happens all at once. It is a process, a journey, a gradual unfolding. Even a king of the gods must walk the path one step at a time. May we, like Sakka, have the courage to ask the questions that matter most. May we, like him, recognize that even the greatest pleasures are not the final answer. And may we, through steady practice, through patient effort, through genuine faith in the Buddha's teaching, draw ever nearer to the happiness that does not change, the happiness that does not pass away, the happiness that is the cessation of suffering itself. Story 5. A Deva rescued from despair. In the Tāvatimsa heaven, there lived a Deva named Nandana. His name meant the one who delights, and indeed his existence was one of constant delight. He dwelt in magnificent celestial gardens, surrounded by the most beautiful beings in all the realms. His palace was radiant with light. His companions were joyful and carefree. He had lived in this realm for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to feel sorrow, to know loss, to experience the slightest touch of suffering. Nandana was, by any measure, one of the most fortunate beings in existence. And yet, on the night of our story, Nandana was not delighted. He was terrified. Something had changed in Nandana's body and mind. He had felt it coming gradually, like the first cool breeze of autumn after a long summer. His radiance had dimmed slightly, his pleasure in the gardens had lessened, his conversations with other Devas had grown routine. And one day, he had looked at the flowers he had always loved and felt nothing at all. Nandana went to a physician among the Devas and asked what was happening to him. The physician examined him with the subtle perceptions available to celestial beings and gave him an answer that struck him like a thunderbolt. Nandana's accumulated merits were almost exhausted. The good karmas that had brought him to the Tāvatimsa heaven were nearly spent. In a short time, he would fall from this realm and be reborn somewhere else, perhaps in a lower heaven, perhaps in the human world, perhaps in one of the realms of suffering. For most beings, this news would be troubling but manageable. But Nandana had lived so long in the Tāvatimsa heaven that he had forgotten what existence was like outside of it. The thought of falling, of losing his radiance, his companions, his beautiful gardens, was more than he could bear. The fear grew inside him, and with the fear came despair. He began to think thoughts that celestial beings rarely think. He thought, would it not be better to end his existence now, to hasten the process, to remove himself from a world that was about to reject him? These thoughts were not logical. They were the thoughts of one whose mind had become disordered by fear, one who could not see any way forward, any hope, any possibility of happiness. And so Nandana climbed to the highest point of his garden, to a place where he could see far beyond the boundaries of the Tāvatimsa realm, to the dark spaces between the worlds where nothing existed at all. He stood at the edge, looking down into the void, preparing to jump. It was at that moment that the Buddha appeared. The Buddha was not physically present in the Tāvatimsa heaven. He was in the human world, in a monastery near Sahampati, sitting in meditation as the night deepened. But through the power of his awakening, he was aware of what was happening in the celestial realms. He perceived Nandana standing at the edge of the void, about to end his existence out of fear and despair. And he knew that he had to act. The Buddha did not appear with a dramatic flash of light or a booming voice. He manifested simply, as he often did when teaching celestial beings, as a subtle presence that could be perceived by the Deva's inner eye. Nandana felt the presence before he saw it, and he turned from the void to find the Buddha standing before him. Nandana recognized the Buddha immediately. He had heard of him, had heard that in the human world there was an awakened being who taught a Dhamma that could liberate beings from suffering. He had never met the Buddha personally, had never received a teaching from him directly. But he knew, in that moment, that this presence was not ordinary. "Venerable Sir," Nandana said, his voice trembling, "how did you come to be here? I was just about to—" "I know what you were about to do," the Buddha said gently. "That is why I came." Nandana was ashamed. He was a Deva of the Tāvatimsa heaven, one of the most blessed beings in existence, and he had been reduced to contemplating self-destruction. What would this awakened one think of him? What judgment would he pass? But the Buddha did not judge. He sat down nearby and invited Nandana to sit with him. And then, in a voice that was calm and compassionate, he began to speak. "Nandana," the Buddha said, "tell me, what is happening to you? What has brought you to this place, at this moment?" And so Nandana told him. He spoke about the exhaustion of his merits, about the dimming of his radiance, about the approach of his fall from the Tāvatimsa realm. He spoke about his fear, his shame, his sense that existence in a diminished state would be unbearable. He spoke about the despair that had grown inside him until it became a darkness that he could not escape. The Buddha listened without interrupting. When Nandana finished, there was a moment of silence, and then the Buddha spoke. "Nandana, I understand your fear. I understand why the thought of falling from this realm is distressing to you. The Tāvatimsa heaven is beautiful. Your existence here has been filled with joy. The prospect of losing all of this is painful, and it is natural to resist pain. Nandana nodded. At least the Buddha understood. But let me ask you something, the Buddha continued. You say that you have been in this realm for a very long time. You say that you have experienced great happiness here. Is that true? It is true, Venerable Sir. I have been happy here. I have been very happy. And when you were happy, did you believe that happiness would last forever? Nandana paused. This was a question he had not considered. No, he admitted. I knew in some part of my mind that nothing lasts forever. Even Devas must eventually pass from this realm. But the knowing was distant, abstract. I did not truly feel it until now. And now you feel it, the Buddha said. Now that the end is approaching, you feel the impermanence of all things. You feel the fragility of your happiness, and the feeling is painful. Yes, Venerable Sir, it is very painful. The Buddha nodded. Nandana, this pain you are feeling, this fear and despair, is it new, or have you felt something like it before? Nandana thought about this. I have felt it before, he said slowly. Not in this realm, not in the Tāvatimsa heaven, but before I was reborn here, in my previous lives, I remember feeling something similar. There were moments of loss, moments when things I loved were taken away. I felt this same pain then. And did those moments pass? The Buddha asked. Did the pain remain forever? No, Nandana said. The pain always passed eventually. Things changed. The loss was followed by something else. Sometimes joy, sometimes simply the passage of time. The pain never remained forever. Exactly, the Buddha said. Nandana, that is what you are forgetting. You are forgetting that pain is impermanent. You are so afraid of the pain of falling, of losing your happiness, that you have forgotten that even that pain will not last. It will pass, as all pain passes. And what comes after the pain, you do not know. Nandana sat with these words. They were simple, almost too simple, but they touched something in him, something that had been hidden beneath the fear. Venerable Sir, he said, are you saying that I should not be afraid of falling? That I should simply accept it? I am saying something different, the Buddha replied. I am not asking you to welcome suffering or to pretend that losing something you love is easy. That would be dishonest. What I am saying is this. You are not your happiness. You are not your radiance. You are not the beauty of this garden. These things come and go, arise and pass away. But there is something in you that observes these changes, that knows them, that is aware of them. That something is not affected by what happens to your circumstances. It is aware, it is knowing, and it is at peace when you allow it to be. The Buddha went on to teach Nandana about the nature of mind, about the difference between the changing and the unchanging, between the conditioned and the unconditioned. He did not speak in abstract terms or philosophical jargon. He spoke in the way he always spoke, in images and examples that a being like Nandana could understand. Imagine, the Buddha said, a person watching clouds pass across the sky. Sometimes the clouds are dark and heavy with rain. Sometimes they are bright and white and beautiful. The person watching does not become the clouds. They do not take on the cloud's nature, whether it is dark or bright. They simply watch, and when the clouds pass away, the person remains unchanged by what they observed. Nandana listened. He had never thought of existence in this way. He had always identified himself with his circumstances, with his beauty, his happiness, his realm. When these things were threatened, he felt as if he himself was being destroyed. But the Buddha was suggesting something different. He was suggesting that Nandana was more than his circumstances, deeper than his happiness, more vast than his realm. The falling that you fear, the Buddha said, is not destruction. It is change. You will move from one state to another. You will leave behind what you have known and enter something new. This is the nature of existence. It is not a punishment. It is simply the way things are. And if you can see it clearly, if you can accept it without resistance, the pain will be less. Not absent, but less. Because the pain comes not from the change itself, but from our attachment to what is passing away. Nandana felt something shift inside him. The darkness that had been pressing down on him did not disappear entirely. The fear was still there, the grief for what he was about to lose. But alongside these feelings, a new clarity had appeared. He saw, more clearly than he had ever seen before, the nature of his situation. He was not being destroyed. He was changing. And change, however painful, was not the end. "Venerable Sir," Nandana said, "I understand now, or at least I begin to understand. I was so afraid of losing what I have that I forgot to see what I am. I was so attached to my happiness that I could not bear the thought of its ending. But you are right. The ending is not destruction. It is simply change. And if I can watch the change without clinging, without resisting, I will find a peace that does not depend on whether the clouds are bright or dark." The Buddha nodded. "You have learned quickly, Nandana. That is well. The mind that can see impermanence clearly, that can accept change without clinging, that mind is already free from a great deal of suffering. You will fall from this realm. You will be reborn somewhere else. You will experience loss and gain, pleasure and pain, again and again, for as long as the cycle continues. But if you carry with you this understanding, if you remember what you have learned tonight, the suffering will be less. Not because your circumstances will improve, but because your relationship to your circumstances will change." Nandana bowed his head. The despair that had driven him to the edge of the void had not entirely vanished. He still faced a difficult time ahead. He would fall. He would lose much that he loved. The process would be painful, as all loss is painful. But he no longer felt that he had to destroy himself to escape it. "I will remember, Venerable Sir," Nandana said. "I will carry this teaching with me into whatever realm I enter next. I will remember that happiness is impermanent, that loss is inevitable, that the pain of change is not the end of all things. And I will practice, as I can, to develop a mind that is not shaken by what arises and passes away." The Buddha rose. "That is well, Nandana. That is the path. Walk it with courage and with patience. The suffering will diminish. The peace will grow. This I promise you, not because I have any power to spare you from the nature of existence, but because I have seen for myself that it is so." And then, as quietly as he had come, the Buddha was gone. Nandana found himself alone in his garden once more, surrounded by the beauty that he had loved for so long, facing the loss that he could no longer avoid. But the darkness had lifted. The despair had receded. He sat in the garden, watching the celestial flowers sway in the breeze, and he felt something that he had not expected to feel: gratitude. The next day, or the next aeon, or however time is measured in the Tāvatimsa heaven, Nandana fell from his realm. It happened as the physician had predicted. His radiance faded. His companions looked at him with confusion and then with pity. And then, in a moment that had been approaching since before he could remember, he passed from the Tāvasa heaven to another realm, another state of existence, another place in the vast cycle of becoming. The fall was not pleasant. The loss was real. The grief was genuine. But Nandana carried with him the teaching he had received on that night. And he discovered that it was true. The suffering was not as great as he had feared. The pain was sharp but temporary. And in the midst of the loss, he found a stillness that did not depend on what he had, only on what he understood. This is the teaching that the Buddha gave to a Deva on the edge of despair. He did not promise to spare him from suffering. He did not promise to restore his lost happiness. He simply showed him the nature of things, the impermanence of all conditions, the peace that is available when we stop clinging to what is passing away. And that teaching, given in a celestial garden on the night when a Deva was about to destroy himself, has been passed down through the centuries, offered to any being who is ready to hear it. May we, like Nandana, find the courage to sit with our suffering, to look at it clearly, to understand its nature. May we, when the darkness presses in, remember that darkness is not the only thing that exists. And may we, through the practice of seeing impermanence clearly, discover the peace that does not depend on whether our circumstances are bright or dark, whether our clouds are beautiful or heavy with rain. The change will come, the loss will come, the fall will come, but the awareness that witnesses these things remains, and in that awareness is freedom. Story 6. Sāriputta teaches the Celestial Maiden. Sāriputta was one of the two chief disciples of the Buddha, renowned throughout the monastic community for his wisdom, while his fellow chief disciple, Moggallāna, was known for his supernatural powers. Sāriputta was known for something deeper. He had the ability to penetrate the Dhamma so completely, to understand the Buddha's teaching so thoroughly that he could explain it in ways that touched the heart of any listener, whether that listener was a monk who had practiced for decades or a layperson who had only just heard the word. But Sāriputta's powers were not limited to teaching in the human world. He too had developed the meditative abilities that allowed him to travel to other realms, to visit the celestial worlds, to encounter beings in states of existence far removed from the ordinary human experience. And on the occasion we are about to consider, one of these visits would change the life of a celestial maiden who had believed herself to be beyond the reach of suffering. The celestial maiden was named Nanda. This name means joy or delight, and indeed, Nanda had much to delight in. She dwelt in the Tāvatimsa heaven, the realm of the 33, in a part of that realm that was reserved for the most beautiful and radiant of celestial beings. She was young in celestial terms, recently reborn into this realm through the power of her past meritorious actions. Her beauty was extraordinary, her radiance dazzling, her youth preserved by the subtle conditions of celestial existence. She had not known illness. She had not known decay. She had not known the slightest touch of the suffering that afflicts beings in lower realms. And because she had not known these things, she believed that she never would. Nanda was proud of her beauty. She would spend her days admiring her reflection in the celestial pools, arranging her ornaments, conversing with other Devas about the magnificence of their realm and the superiority of celestial existence over the crude and painful lives of beings in the lower worlds. She took pleasure in her youth, in her radiance, in the admiration of others. She believed that these qualities were permanent, that they would remain with her for the full span of her celestial lifespan, and that when that lifespan eventually ended, she would simply be reborn in another beautiful realm to continue her joyful existence. It was in this state of mind, this comfortable pride, that Nanda encountered Sāriputta. Sāriputta had traveled to the Tāvatimsa heaven for his own reasons, perhaps to visit the Devas and offer them teaching, perhaps simply to observe the workings of karma in the celestial realms. He had not come specifically for Nanda. But when he arrived in that part of the heaven where she dwelt, he sensed her presence, and he perceived with his awakened vision the nature of her mind. He saw that she was intelligent, capable of understanding the Dhamma. He also saw that she was bound by a subtle but significant attachment, the attachment to her own beauty and youth, the belief that these things were truly hers and would remain with her forever. Sāriputta approached her. Nanda saw him and was initially uninterested. He was a human being, an ascetic from the lower world, someone whose appearance was crude and ordinary compared to the radiant beings of the celestial realms. Why should she pay attention to him? Why should she listen to what he had to say? But Sāriputta did not seem to notice her indifference. He simply stood before her and spoke. "Nanda," he said, "I have a question for you." Nanda looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. What question could a human ascetic possibly ask me that would interest me? Sāriputta smiled gently. "It is a simple question, Nanda, but perhaps you will find it worth answering." And then he asked, "Nanda, do you know this body of yours?" Nanda was surprised by the question. She had expected something philosophical or religious, some discussion of celestial matters or the nature of the gods. Instead, this ascetic was asking her about her own body. "Of course I know my body," she said. "It is beautiful, it is radiant, it is young and full of vitality. I am proud of my body, and rightly so. It is one of the finest bodies in all the celestial realms." Sāriputta nodded. "Yes, I can see that it is beautiful. But let me ask you something more specific. This body of yours, the one you know so well, the one you are so proud of, do you know what it is made of?" Nanda frowned. "What do you mean? What is it made of?" "It is made of celestial substance. It is composed of the finest essences of the heavenly realms. It is." "Perhaps," Sāriputta interrupted gently, "you would allow me to explain what I mean. In the teaching of the Buddha, there is a practice of contemplation that is called the meditation on the body. It is a practice that examines the body in detail, that sees it clearly as it truly is, not merely as it appears to be. This practice can be undertaken by any being, celestial or human, who wishes to understand the nature of existence. Would you be willing to hear about it?" Nanda was curious despite herself. There was something in Sāriputta's voice that drew her attention, a quality of certainty and kindness that she had not expected to find in a human being. She nodded and Sāriputta began to teach. "The body," he said, "is composed of 32 parts. There are 20 parts of the body itself and 12 parts of the elements that support it. Let me name them for you, Nanda, and as I name them, consider each one carefully." He began with the hair of the head. "This is a part of your body, Nanda. Hair. Then the hair of the body. Nails, teeth, skin, flesh, tendons, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, stomach, feces, brain." These were the 20 major parts. Then he went on to the elements: earth, water, fire, air, and then the organs of sense: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and finally mind. 32 parts in all, Sāriputta said. Each one is a part of your body, Nanda. Each one is impermanent. Each one arises through conditions and passes away through conditions. The hair on your head, the teeth in your mouth, the skin that covers your flesh, the bones that give your body its shape, none of these are permanent. None of these are truly yours in the sense of belonging to a self that endures. They are processes, changing moment by moment, arising and passing away in accordance with causes and conditions. Nanda listened. She had never thought about her body in this way. She had always seen it as a beautiful whole, a radiant object of pride and pleasure. But now, as Sāriputta named each part, she found herself looking at herself differently. She saw the body as it truly was, not as it appeared to be. She saw the process beneath the appearance, the change beneath the seeming permanence. "This is difficult to hear," she said. "I do not like thinking about my body in this way." "I understand," Sāriputta said. "It is not pleasant to see the body clearly, especially for a being who is proud of her beauty. But let me ask you, does the knowledge of these 32 parts diminish your beauty? Does the understanding that they are impermanent change what they are in this moment? The body is still beautiful, Nanda. It is still radiant, but it is also temporary. It is also composed of parts that arise and pass away. The beauty and the impermanence exist together. They are not contradictions." Nanda fell silent. She was thinking about what Sāriputta had said. She was looking at herself with new eyes, seeing not just the surface but the depth, not just the appearance but the nature. And in that seeing, something shifted. "Venerable sir," she said slowly, "you are saying that my body, however beautiful, is not truly mine. It is not a self that I possess and control. It is a process, a flow of arising and passing away, and I have been clinging to it as if it were a permanent possession." "That is exactly what I am saying," Sāriputta replied. "And not only the body, the mind that perceives the body, the consciousness that knows the body, these too are processes. They arise and pass away. There is no permanent self to be found anywhere in the body or outside it. This is what the Buddha teaches. This is the truth of not self, anatta. Nanda sat with this teaching. She had been proud of her beauty, proud of her youth, proud of her radiance, but now she saw that these qualities were not truly hers in the way she had believed. They were conditions, temporary and fragile, and they would pass away as all conditions pass away. I see it now, she said. I see what you are showing me. The body is not the self. The self is not the body. There is no permanent self anywhere, and to cling to the body as if it were a permanent self is to set oneself up for suffering. Sāriputta nodded. You understand well, Nanda. This understanding is the beginning of wisdom. It is not the end, but it is a crucial step. When we see clearly that the body is not self, that it is impermanent and subject to change, we begin to release our attachment to it. We begin to find a peace that does not depend on the body being young or old, beautiful or plain, healthy or ill. This peace is what the Buddha teaches. This is the path to liberation. Nanda had come to Sāriputta full of pride, full of attachment, full of the comfortable certainty that her beautiful existence would continue unchanged forever. But now that certainty was shattered. She saw her situation clearly for the first time. She was a being in the cycle of existence, subject to change, subject to loss, subject to suffering, however beautiful her current circumstances might be. And in that seeing, something remarkable happened. The pride that had bound her, the attachment that had kept her trapped in the belief that her happiness depended on external conditions, began to loosen. She did not become sad or depressed, she became free. Free from the burden of clinging to something that could not be clung to. Free from the fear of losing something that was never truly hers. The early texts tell us that at this moment, Nanda attained the fruit of stream entry, the first stage of liberation on the Buddhist path. She was no longer a being who could fall back into the lower realms. She was on the path, advancing toward full liberation, carried forward by the momentum of her new understanding. Nanda bowed to Sāriputta with deep gratitude. Venerable Sir, she said, I came to you full of pride and attachment, and you showed me the truth. I do not know if I would ever have understood this without your teaching. I would have continued in my pride, believing my beauty was permanent, until the day I fell from this realm and discovered too late what I had failed to see. You have saved me from a great deal of future suffering. I do not know how to thank you adequately. Sāriputta smiled. There is no need to thank me, Nanda. The teaching came from the Buddha. I am merely a messenger. What matters is that you have heard, that you have understood, and that you will practice. The path is open to you now. Walk it with diligence and with joy. Nanda nodded. She understood. And then, as quietly as he had come, Sāriputta departed, returning to the human world, leaving Nanda alone in the celestial garden with a new understanding of herself and her existence. This encounter between Sāriputta and Nanda is one of the most beautiful in the early Buddhist texts. It shows us that liberation is not reserved for those who have renounced the world, who have left home and become monks. It is available to any being, celestial or human, who is willing to look clearly at the nature of existence. Nanda was proud, attached, comfortable in her celestial existence. But when Sāriputta asked her a simple question about her body, she was willing to examine the answer honestly, and in that examination, she found freedom. The teaching about the 32 parts of the body is a practice that continues to be used in Buddhist meditation to this day. Monks and laypeople alike contemplate these parts, seeing them clearly as they are, releasing their attachment to the body as a permanent self. The practice is not meant to make us despise our bodies or feel ashamed of them. It is meant to show us the truth, to help us see that the body is a process, not a possession, a flow, not a fixed thing. And when we see this clearly, we find a peace that does not depend on the body being any particular way. Nanda found this peace. She continued to live in the Tāvatimsa heaven, continued to enjoy its beauty, continued to experience celestial happiness. But her relationship to that happiness had changed. She no longer clung to it as if it were permanent. She no longer believed that her beauty was a self that would endure forever. She saw it clearly, held it lightly, and found in that clarity a freedom that no external circumstance could take away. May we, like Nanda, have the courage to examine our attachments honestly. May we have the willingness to look at ourselves and our circumstances clearly, even when that seeing challenges our pride. And may we, through the practice of clear seeing, discover the peace that lies beyond all clinging, the freedom that is available to any being who is ready to let go. We have traveled far tonight. We have stood beneath the Bodhi tree at the moment of awakening. We have visited the highest Brahmā realms and the gardens of the Tāvatimsa heaven. We have walked with Moggallāna through the air and sat beside the Buddha as he prepared to let go of the world. We have met Sakka, seeking happiness beyond all heavens. We have witnessed a Deva saved from despair by the simple truth of impermanence. And we have seen Sāriputta guide a celestial maiden to freedom through the contemplation of the body. What connects all of these encounters? Not the realm, though we have moved through many. Not the status of the beings involved, though we have met Brahmās and kings of the heavens. What connects them is something simpler and deeper. Each being who approached the Buddha or his disciples came with a question, and each question, however it was phrased, was really asking the same thing. How can I be free? The Buddha never turned any being away. He never said that the answer was beyond reach, that the teaching was not meant for them. He answered. He taught. And those who listened found something that they could not find anywhere else, something that no amount of celestial power or meditative attainment could provide on its own. We are approaching the end of our journey tonight. There are 3 more stories to tell, and then we will close. We are almost home. Story 7. A Deva asks about the Creator. There was once a Deva named Viranja who dwelt in one of the celestial realms above the human world. His name came from the Brahmin lineage from which his family had descended in a past life, and he carried with him the traditions and questions of that lineage. In particular, Viranja had been raised in an environment where the question of the world's origin was considered of supreme importance. The Brahmins taught that the world was created by a supreme being, a cosmic architect who had designed and fashioned all that exists. This teaching had been passed down for generations, and Viranja had accepted it as a child accepts the teachings of its elders without question, without doubt. But as he grew in the celestial realms, as he observed the cycles of existence, the rising and falling of worlds, the endless turning of the wheel of birth and death, Viranja began to have doubts. He saw things that seemed inconsistent with the idea of a creator. He saw suffering that seemed unnecessary, pain that seemed gratuitous, imperfection that seemed incompatible with a being of infinite power and wisdom. If a creator had made this world, why had he made it so flawed? Why had he allowed suffering to exist? Why had he created beings who would inevitably fall, who would experience pain and loss and death? These questions troubled Viranja for a long time. He discussed them with other Devas, with Brahmās, with anyone who might have an answer. But no one could give him a satisfactory response. Some dismissed his questions as irrelevant. Others told him to accept the traditional teaching without questioning, but Viranja was not satisfied. He needed to know. And so, eventually, he decided to go to the Buddha. The Buddha was staying at Jeta's Grove, the monastery near Sahampati, and Viranja descended from his celestial realm to seek an audience with him. This was not an unusual thing for a Deva to do. The Buddha had become known throughout the celestial realms as a teacher who could answer even the most difficult questions, a being who had awakened to truth that no one else had seen. Many Devas had come to him before, and many had received answers that satisfied their doubts. Varanja arrived at Jeta's grove late in the evening, when the monastery had grown quiet and the monks had retired to their dwelling places. He approached the Buddha with respect and humility, bowing in the traditional way, and then he sat down nearby and posed his question. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I have been troubled for a long time by a question about the world. In the tradition in which I was raised, it is taught that the world was created by a supreme being, a creator who designed and made all that exists. But when I look at the world, I see suffering that seems unnecessary. I see imperfection that seems inconsistent with infinite wisdom. I see pain and death that seem incompatible with a benevolent creator. So I come to you with my question. Is there a creator? Did a supreme being make this world?" The Buddha listened to Varanja's question carefully. He did not answer immediately. He understood that this was a question that had been troubling beings for a long time, a question that lay at the heart of many religious traditions, and a question that required more than a simple yes or no. "Varanja," the Buddha said, "you ask whether a supreme being created the world. Let me ask you something in return. If there were a creator, what would you expect him to be like?" Varanja considered. "If there were a creator, Venerable Sir, I would expect him to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good. He would have the ability to create anything, the wisdom to know the best way to create, and the goodness to want only the best for his creations. And yet," the Buddha said, "you see suffering in the world. You see imperfection. You see pain and death. And these observations trouble you because they seem inconsistent with the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good creator." "Yes, Venerable Sir, that is exactly my difficulty." The Buddha nodded. "Then let me ask you another question. Suppose there were a creator who made the world exactly as it is. Would that creator also have made the suffering, the imperfection, the pain and death?" Varanja hesitated. This was the heart of his doubt, and he had never quite articulated it in this way before. If the Creator made everything, then yes, he would have made the suffering too. And would a Creator who is all-knowing and perfectly good want to make suffering? Would he create beings knowing that they would suffer? No, Venerable Sir. If he were truly all-knowing and perfectly good, he would not. And so, the Buddha said, you are troubled, not because you doubt the existence of a creator, but because you cannot reconcile the existence of suffering with the idea of a creator who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. Varanja sat with these words. The Buddha had clarified something that he had felt but never quite understood. His problem was not a simple doubt about the existence of a creator. It was a deeper difficulty, a question about the nature of suffering and its relationship to any theory of creation. Venerable Sir, Varanja said, if there is no creator, then how did the world come to be? How did all of this existence arise? The Buddha understood that this was the next question, the one that naturally followed from the first. Varanja had been taught that everything must have a creator, that nothing can arise without being made by some higher power. This was a common belief, widespread in the ancient world, and it was a belief that the Buddha's teaching directly challenged. Varanja, the Buddha said, let me explain something that may be new to you. In the teaching that I offer, there is a principle called dependent origination, paticca. This principle states that nothing arises without conditions. Everything that exists arises through the meeting of causes and conditions. The world did not come into being through the will of a creator. It arose through a process of dependent origination, each thing arising because other things existed before it, each condition leading to the next condition, in a vast web of cause and effect that has no beginning and no end. Varanja found this difficult to understand. But Venerable Sir, if there was no beginning, how can there be anything at all? Everything must have a starting point. There must have been a first cause, a first creator who began the process. The Buddha smiled gently. Varanja, this is a common confusion. You assume, that everything must have a beginning, that there must have been a first cause. But I ask you, if there was a creator who existed before the world, what existed before that creator? And what existed before that? If you say that the creator was the first cause, you are simply pushing the question back one step without answering it. You are saying that something always existed, so why not simply accept that existence itself is beginningless? Varañģa struggled with this. He had never considered that the question of existence might not have a beginning. It seemed logical to him that there must be a starting point, a first cause, a creator. But the Buddha's reasoning was also logical, and he could not find a flaw in it. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I confess that I do not fully understand. Your teaching about dependent origination is new to me. I was taught that everything has a creator, but you seem to be saying that everything arises from conditions without a creator." "It is new?" the Buddha acknowledged. "It is a teaching that contradicts many traditional beliefs. But let me offer you a way to test it. You have observed the world. You have seen suffering. You have seen imperfection. You have seen the cycles of birth and death, the rising and falling of beings, the endless change that characterizes all existence. Now, if there were a creator who made the world intentionally, would he have made it this way? Would he have made a world characterized by impermanence, by suffering, by death? No, Venerable Sir, I do not think he would. And yet the world is characterized by impermanence, suffering, and death. This suggests, does it not, that the world did not arise through the intention of a creator, but through the blind operation of causes and conditions, which do not have the capacity to intend anything? Varañģa saw the force of this argument. The Buddha was not claiming that there was no creator out of ignorance or rebellion. He was claiming that the existence of suffering was evidence that the world did not arise through intentional creation. A creator who was all-knowing and perfectly good would not have created a world like this, and therefore the world did not arise through creation. But Venerable Sir, Varañģa said, if there is no creator, then who is responsible? Who is to blame for the suffering? If there is no one who made the world, then suffering has no author, no explanation, no meaning. The Buddha's expression became gentle. This was a deep question, one that went to the heart of the human experience of suffering. And he knew that Varañģa, like all beings, was looking not just for an intellectual answer, but for a way to make peace with the existence of pain. Varañģa, the Buddha said, suffering has a cause, and that cause is not outside of you. It is not imposed by a creator. It arises from your own actions, your own intentions, your own cravings. This is the teaching that I call the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. It arises from craving. It can be brought to an end, and there is a path that leads to its end. The suffering in the world is not created by a god. It is created by beings who crave, who attach, who grasp. And it can be ended by beings who stop craving, who let go, who release their attachment. The Buddha went on to explain the Four Noble Truths more fully. He spoke about the first truth, the truth of suffering, the dissatisfaction that characterizes all conditioned existence. He spoke about the second truth, the origin of suffering, which is craving in its three forms, the craving for sense pleasures, the craving for existence, the craving for non-existence. He spoke about the third truth, the cessation of suffering, which is nibbāna, the state where craving has been completely abandoned. And he spoke about the fourth truth, the path to the cessation of suffering, which is the noble eightfold path of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Varañģa listened. He had come with a question about the Creator, and he was receiving an answer that went far beyond his question. The Buddha was not just telling him whether there was a Creator. He was telling him the nature of existence itself, the cause of suffering, and the way to its cessation. This was a complete teaching, a a comprehensive framework for understanding life and finding freedom from its difficulties. Venerable Sir, Vajrayana said when the Buddha had finished, I came to you with a question about the Creator, and you have given me something much larger. I do not fully understand everything you have said, but I understand this much. Suffering is real, it has a cause, it can be ended, and there is a path. This is enough for me to begin. This is enough for me to practice. The Buddha nodded with approval. That is well, Vajrayana. You have understood the essential point. The question of whether there is a creator is secondary. What matters is the question of suffering and its cessation. Even if there were a creator, it would not change the fact that you suffer, or the fact that your suffering has a cause in your own craving, or the fact that it can be brought to an end through the path that I have taught. The Creator, if he exists, cannot free you from suffering. Only you can free yourself by understanding its nature and walking the path that leads beyond it. Vajrayana sat with these words. They were challenging in some ways because they placed the responsibility for his suffering and its cessation squarely on his own shoulders. There was no one else to blame, and there was no one else who could save him. But there was also something liberating in this, something that lifted a burden he had not known he was carrying. If suffering was not imposed by a creator, then its elimination was not dependent on appeasing or pleasing that creator. It was simply a matter of understanding and practice. Venerable Sir, Vajrayana said, I thank you for this teaching. I came with a question, and you have given me an answer that goes to the heart of my existence. I will practice what you have taught. I will observe the arising and passing away of conditioned things. I will contemplate the Four Noble Truths, and I will walk the Noble Eightfold Path as best I can. I do not know how long it will take, but I know that the path is here and that it leads somewhere. The Buddha smiled. That is the right attitude, Vajrayana. Walk the path with patience and with diligence. The results will come in their own time. And when they come, you will understand for yourself what cannot be understood merely by hearing about it. This I promise you. Vajrayana rose, bowed to the Buddha in gratitude and reverence, and then departed, ascending back to his celestial realm. He did not have all the answers to his questions. He still did not know whether there was a creator or not, and perhaps he would never know with certainty. But he had received something more valuable than answers. He had received a path, a way of practice, a framework for understanding his own existence that did not depend on questions that could not be resolved. And as he returned to his celestial realm, Vajrayana carried with him the teaching that suffering arises from craving, not from a creator, and that the end of craving is the end of suffering. This was enough. This was more than enough. This encounter between the Buddha and Vajrayana illustrates one of the most distinctive features of Buddhist teaching, its refusal to answer certain questions that other traditions consider essential. The Buddha did not say definitively whether there was a creator or not. He suggested that the question was unanswerable and, more importantly, that it was not the right question to ask. The right question was about suffering, about its cause, about its cessation, about the path that leads to freedom. Whatever the ultimate origin of the world might be, it did not change the fact of suffering or the way to its ending. This is the Buddha's approach to metaphysics, to questions about the nature of ultimate reality. He does not deny the existence of gods or creators, but he places them in the context of dependent origination. Even if there were creators, they too would arise through conditions, and their creations would be subject to the same laws of impermanence and suffering as everything else. Nothing in the cosmos is exempt from the Four Noble Truths, and no being, however powerful, can escape the consequences of its own craving. May we, like Vajrayana, have the courage to ask the deep questions, even when they cannot be fully answered. May we have the wisdom to recognize when a question, however logical it may seem, is not the right question to pursue. And may we, through the practice of the Buddha's teaching, find freedom from the suffering that arises from our own attachments, our own cravings, our own unskillful actions. The Creator, if He exists, cannot save us. Only we can save ourselves, by understanding the nature of our own minds and walking the path that leads to peace. Story 8. Sahampati takes refuge a second time. There is a moment in the life of any spiritual seeker when the teacher one has followed turns out to have limitations. This is not a comfortable moment. It is the moment when faith encounters fact, when devotion meets doubt, when the very ground that seems so solid begins to shift beneath one's feet. For most beings, this moment is a crisis. It is the moment when one must decide whether to hold on to the familiar teacher, to make excuses, to pretend that the limitation does not exist, or to acknowledge the truth and move on. Sahampati, the great Brahmā who had descended from the highest realms on the night of the Buddha's awakening to request that the teaching be given to the world, faced exactly this moment. He had lived a long life in the Brahmā worlds, a life measured in cosmic ages, a life of deep meditation and profound peace. He had believed, as all Brahmās believe, that he had reached the highest possible state, that there was nothing beyond the realms of formlessness and concentration that he inhabited. And when he had encountered the Buddha on the night of the awakening, he had recognized in him a teacher of extraordinary power. He had bowed, he had requested, he had received the teaching with joy. But sometime after that first encounter, Sahampati had made a mistake. He had listened to another Brahmā, a being named Baka, who taught that the realm of the Subdues was eternal, that the state that Baka and his followers had achieved was permanent, that there was no awakening beyond the highest meditative absorption. Baka was confident, articulate, persuasive. He had lived in that realm for eons, and his certainty was absolute. Sahampati, who had been so sure of the Buddha's teaching, found himself drawn in. Perhaps, he thought, the Buddha had been mistaken. Perhaps there was something beyond the teaching that the Buddha offered, something that Baka and his followers had discovered. And so Sahampati had followed Baka's teaching for a time. He had practiced as Baka instructed. He had sat in meditation, cultivating the states of absorption that led to the Subdues realm and beyond, seeking the permanence that Baka promised. But something was wrong. The deeper Sahampati went, the more he realized that the permanence he sought was not to be found. He could achieve states of profound stillness, states where the ordinary fluctuations of the mind seemed to cease entirely. But when he emerged from those states, the world was still changing. His thoughts were still arising and passing away. His existence was still impermanent, still conditioned, still subject to the laws of dependent origination. Sahampati realized, with a clarity that came like a sudden light in a dark room, that he had been deceived. Not deliberately, perhaps. Baka believed what he taught, as all teachers believe what they teach. But Baka was wrong. The teaching of permanence, the teaching that any state of existence, however refined, however peaceful, was the final truth, was a teaching that could not withstand examination. And Sahampati had examined it. He had examined it with the clarity of one who had spent eons in meditation, with the patience of one who was willing to sit with uncertainty until the truth became clear. The truth was this: no Brahmā, however elevated, however absorbed in the highest states of concentration, was free from suffering as long as the fetters remained. The belief in one's own eternity, the belief that one had reached the highest possible state, the belief that there was nothing beyond the conditions of one's current existence, these were themselves fetters, subtle but real, binding the being to the cycle of becoming. And Sahampati, to his sorrow, had recognized these fetters in himself. It was this recognition that brought him back to the Buddha. The Buddha was staying at Jeta's grove, in the monastery near Sahampati, and late one evening, as the shadows lengthened and the monastery grew quiet, Sahampati descended from his realm and made his way to the place where the Buddha sat in meditation. He came not with the confidence of their first encounter, when he had descended to request that the teaching be given. He came with humility, with a sense of shame, with the recognition that he had strayed from the path and needed to return. He approached the Buddha and bowed, not with the easy reverence of their first meeting, but with a deeper bow, a bow that acknowledged his error, his confusion, his need to begin again. The Buddha looked up and recognized his visitor. "Sahampati," he said, "it has been some time since we last spoke. What brings you here now?" Sahampati took a breath. He had rehearsed what he would say, but now, facing the Buddha directly, the words seemed inadequate. Still, he spoke. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I have come to confess something to you and to ask for your teaching once more." The Buddha waited. He did not press, did not demand, did not express disappointment or frustration. He simply waited, with the patience that was characteristic of all his interactions with beings who came to him in honesty and humility. "Venerable Sir," Sahampati continued, "on the night of your awakening, I came to you and asked that you teach the Dhamma. You agreed, and you set in motion the wheel of the teaching. I received that teaching with joy, and I believed it. But afterward, I encountered another teacher, a Brahmā named Baka, who taught a different doctrine. He taught that the highest Brahmā realm is eternal, that the state of absorption that one achieves there is permanent, that there is nothing beyond it. I was persuaded by his certainty, Venerable Sir. I followed his teaching for a time, but eventually I realized that it was wrong. The permanence he promised was not to be found. The highest Brahmā realm, however peaceful, however refined, is still impermanent. It arises through conditions and passes away through conditions, like everything else." Sahampati paused. He felt the weight of his admission, the acknowledgement that he had been led astray, but he knew that he could not move forward until he had spoken the truth. "I have come to you now, Venerable Sir, to confess my error and to ask for your teaching again. I wish to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha once more, but this time with a clearer understanding, a more grounded faith. I do not want to be deceived again. I want to follow the path that leads beyond all deception, beyond all illusion, beyond all the subtle fetters that bind beings to the cycle of existence." The Buddha listened to Sahampati's confession in silence. When Sahampati had finished, there was a moment of stillness, and then the Buddha spoke. "Sahampati," he said, "you have done a difficult thing. You have acknowledged your error. You have faced the discomfort of admitting that you were wrong. This takes courage, and I honor that courage." Sahampati felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had expected disappointment, perhaps gentle criticism. He had not expected honor. "But let me tell you something," the Buddha continued, "something that may help you to understand what happened to you. The teaching of Baka, the teaching of permanence, is not unique to Baka. It is a teaching that has been given by many Brahmās in many realms, in many ages. The belief in one's own eternity is one of the subtlest fetters, one of the most difficult to recognize, because it arises from genuine attainment. When one has achieved profound states of meditation, when one has dwelt in the formless realms or the highest Brahmā worlds, it is easy to mistake that attainment for liberation. The peace is real. The concentration is deep, but the peace and concentration are still conditioned. They arise through practice, and they pass away when the conditions change. Liberation is something else entirely." Sahampati listened with complete attention. This was exactly what he had discovered in his own practice, and hearing it confirmed by the Buddha gave him a clarity that he had not possessed before. "What, then, is liberation?" Sahampati asked. "What is the difference between the attainment of the Brahmā realms and true awakening?" The Buddha considered the question. "The difference," he said, "is the presence or absence of the fetters. A Brahmā in the highest realm may have let go of many coarser fetters, the fetters of sensual desire, of ill will, of cruelty. But there are subtler fetters that remain. There is the fetter of pride, the belief in one's own superiority. There is the fetter of agitation, the subtle restlessness that comes from not fully understanding the nature of existence. And there is the fetter of ignorance, the failure to see clearly the Four Noble Truths, the three characteristics of existence, the nature of not-self. When these fetters are completely removed, then, and only then, is there true liberation. And these fetters, Sahampati asked, they can be removed? Even for a Brahmā? Even for one who has lived in the highest realms? They can be removed, the Buddha confirmed. The path that removes them is the same path that I have taught from the night of my awakening to this very moment. It is the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This path can be practiced by any being, in any realm, at any stage of existence. It does not matter whether one is a human being in the world, a Deva in the heavens, or a Brahmā in the highest realms. The path is the same. The goal is the same. The liberation is the same. Sahampati felt his heart opening, as it had opened on the night of the Buddha's awakening. He had come seeking confirmation of his error, seeking perhaps a gentle criticism, and he had received instead a teaching that encompassed his entire experience, that explained what had happened to him and what he needed to do to move forward. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I understand now. The teaching of Baka was wrong, but the error was not simply a matter of wrong information. It was a matter of wrong view, the view that any conditioned state is permanent, the view that any attainment is liberation. I held this view without fully recognizing it, and it bound me even as I thought I was advancing. I see it now. I see the difference between the peace of deep concentration and the peace of awakening. They are not the same." "No," the Buddha agreed. "They are not the same. But this is not to say that concentration is worthless. Concentration is a powerful support for wisdom. When the mind is unified, it can see more clearly. The problem arises when one mistakes the unity of concentration for the freedom of liberation, when one stops practicing because one believes the goal has been reached. This is the danger that you encountered with Baka. He had gone far. He had achieved much. But he had stopped. He believed that his achievement was the end, when it was only a means." Sahampati nodded slowly. "And what should I do now, Venerable Sir? How should I practice?" "Practice as you did before," the Buddha said. "Return to the teaching that I gave you on the night of my awakening. Practice the Noble Eightfold Path with diligence, with patience, with compassion for yourself and for all beings. Do not be discouraged by your error. Errors are part of the path. They teach us what we need to learn. The important thing is not to avoid error, but to recognize it when it occurs and to correct course." The Buddha paused, and then he added something that Sahampati would carry with him for the rest of his existence, however long that existence might be. "And Sahampati, let go of the belief that you must be perfect. Let go of the belief that you should never have followed Baka. These beliefs are just more fetters, more chains that bind you to the cycle of existence. You made a mistake, you recognized the mistake, you came back. This is the practice. This is the path. And if you continue in this way, you will arrive eventually at the place where all mistakes, all errors, all the subtle fetters that bind beings are finally and completely released." Sahampati bowed. His heart was full, not with the confidence of one who has found all the answers, but with the humility of one who has found a teacher he can trust, a teaching he can practice, and a path that leads somewhere real. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. I take refuge in you, in your teaching, and in the community of those who practice. I do not know how long it will take. I do not know what obstacles I will encounter. But I know that the path is here, and that you have shown me the way. I will walk it. I will return to it again and again whenever I stray, and I will trust that in time it will lead me to the freedom that I seek." The Buddha smiled. That is well, Sahampati. That is the practice. And I will tell you something else, something that may encourage you. The fact that you recognized your error, the fact that you came back, the fact that you asked for the teaching again, this shows that your practice is already advanced. Many beings would have made excuses for Baka's teaching, would have rationalized their error, would have refused to admit that they were wrong. But you came, you confessed, you asked. This is the mark of one who is genuinely seeking liberation, one who is willing to face the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. Sahampati received these words like water in a dry land. He had expected disappointment, and he had received encouragement. He had expected criticism, and he had received praise. Not praise for his error, but praise for his willingness to acknowledge it and to return to the path. I will go now, Venerable Sir, Sahampati said. I will return to my realm, and I will practice as you have taught. But I will remember this night. I will remember that you did not turn me away, that you did not judge me, that you gave me exactly what I needed to hear. And I will carry that memory with me as I walk the path, as a reminder that the teacher is always available to those who are willing to return. The Buddha nodded. Go in peace, Sahampati. Practice diligently, and know that I am here whenever you need me. The teaching does not leave you. It is always available in the heart of every being who is ready to receive it. And so Sahampati departed, ascending back to the Brahmā worlds, back to the realm where he had first encountered the Buddha's teaching, back to the places where he had strayed and where he would now practice with renewed commitment. He was not the same being who had descended to the Buddha on the night of the awakening. He had learned something that could only be learned through error, through confusion, through the painful process of recognizing that the path he had followed was not the true path. But he had returned, and that return was the beginning of everything. This encounter between Sahampati and the Buddha teaches us something profound about the nature of the spiritual life. It teaches us that errors are not failures. They are part of the journey. Sahampati strayed from the path. He followed a false teacher. He practiced a doctrine that led not to liberation, but to deeper entanglement. And yet, when he recognized his error, when he humbled himself and returned, he found that the Buddha was still there, still teaching, still ready to guide him forward. This is the beauty of the Buddha's teaching. It does not demand perfection. It does not expect us to get everything right the first time. It asks only that we practice, that we recognize our errors when they occur, and that we return to the path as many times as necessary. Sahampati took refuge twice. He took refuge the first time on the night of the awakening when he descended to request that the teaching be given. He took refuge the second time after he had strayed, after he had learned the hard way what the true path was not. And both times the Buddha was there to receive him. May we, like Sahampati, have the courage to recognize our errors. May we have the humility to admit when we have strayed. And may we always find our way back to the path that leads to freedom, knowing that the return is always possible, that the teacher is always available, that liberation is always within reach for those who are willing to practice. Story Night. Celestial beings disturb the full moon night. On a certain full moon night, the Buddha was staying at Jeta's Grove, the monastery near Savatthi. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting a silver light across the grounds of the monastery. The air was warm and still, fragrant with the scent of night-blooming flowers. The monks had finished their evening duties and were settling into their dwelling places, preparing for sleep or for a night of meditation. The monastery was quiet, peaceful, absorbed in the stillness that descends on such places when the day has ended and the world grows quiet. But on this particular night, the peace of the monastery was about to be disturbed. The Buddha was seated in his usual place, a simple seat beneath a tree, when the air around him began to change. It was not a dramatic change, not a flash of light or a thunderous sound. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first stirrings of a breeze that has not yet become wind. And then, one by one, celestial beings began to arrive. They came from everywhere. They came from the four directions, from the horizons, from the spaces between the worlds. Devas of every kind, from the lowest realms to the highest, began to descend upon Jeta's grove. They came because they had heard that the Buddha would be teaching on this full moon night, and they had come to listen. Some had traveled far, passing through multiple realms to reach the human world. Others had emerged from nearby celestial dimensions, appearing as suddenly as a thought arises in a mind. The air filled with their presence, with their radiance, with the subtle energies of beings who existed on planes of reality far removed from ordinary human experience. The Buddha perceived all of this. He sat in his meditation, calm and centered, aware of everything that was occurring but undisturbed by it. He knew why they had come. He knew what they sought. And he prepared himself to teach. But before the teaching could begin, something unexpected happened. The celestial beings began to argue. It started quietly, as such things do. One Deva whispered to another, a remark about the realm from which he had come, a subtle boast about the quality of his celestial home. Another Deva, overhearing, made his own remark, claiming a higher realm, a more beautiful garden, a more refined existence. The whispers grew louder. The boasts became more emphatic. Soon, the quiet gathering of celestial beings had transformed into a noisy assembly of beings, each trying to outdo the others in the grandeur of their origins. "I come from the Yama heaven," one Deva declared, "where the pleasures are more refined than anything found in the lower realms." "That is nothing," another replied. "I come from the Tusita heaven, where the beings are more radiant, the gardens more beautiful, the happiness more profound." "Please," a third interjected, "I dwell in the Nimanarati heaven, where we create our own worlds according to our wishes. What could be more magnificent than that?" And so it went. Deva after Deva, each claiming superiority, each insisting that their realm was the highest, the most beautiful, the most desirable. The argument grew in intensity. Voices were raised. Subtle celestial energies clashed and swirled. The peaceful atmosphere of the monastery was filled with the noise of celestial beings boasting, challenging, and disputing among themselves. The Buddha sat in the midst of this chaos and said nothing. He sat, he watched, he waited. He was not troubled by the noise. He was not offended by the boasting. He was not moved to intervene or to silence them. He simply sat, as he had sat beneath the Bodhi tree on the night of his awakening, observing everything as it was, allowing the moment to unfold in its own way. And as he sat, he contemplated. He contemplated the nature of the beings before him. They had come seeking the Dhamma. They had traveled from far realms to hear him teach. But even here, even in the presence of the awakened one, even on the threshold of liberation, they could not stop arguing about their origins, their realms, their supposed superiority to one another. The attachment to status, to rank, to the quality of one's existence was so deep that it manifested even among beings who had long ago transcended the ordinary concerns of human life. The Buddha saw this clearly, and he understood that this was perhaps the most important teaching he could offer them tonight. The arguing continued for some time. The Devas were so absorbed in their disputes that they had almost forgotten why they had come. They had come to hear the Buddha teach, but instead they had found a new opportunity to compete, to assert their status, to remind each other and themselves of their importance. This is the nature of certain kinds of attachment. They follow us wherever we go. Even in the celestial realms, even with long lives and refined pleasures, the tendency to grasp at status and superiority remains. Eventually, the Buddha decided that the time had come to speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words he spoke were quiet, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that cut through all the noise and all the boasting like a light cutting through darkness. The Buddha said, All of you have come from many different realms. Each of you dwells in a different place, enjoys a different kind of happiness, lives a different kind of life. But let me ask you something. Is any of you free from suffering? The arguing stopped. Not gradually, not with a fading away of noise. It stopped immediately, completely, as if someone had thrown a switch. The celestial beings turned to the Buddha, their boasting silenced, their disputes forgotten. They had been arguing about who was superior, and now the Buddha had asked them a question that cut to the heart of everything. Is any of you free from suffering? The silence was profound. The Devas looked at one another. They looked at the Buddha. They looked within themselves. And they realized, with a clarity that came from hearing the question asked so directly, that none of them could answer yes. Not one of them was free from suffering. Not one of them had escaped the fundamental dissatisfaction that characterizes all existence within the cycle of birth and death. They were celestial beings, beings of great power and long life. But they were still bound by the same forces that bound all beings in all realms. They still experienced craving. They still experienced attachment. They still experienced the subtle suffering that comes from clinging to existence itself. The Buddha continued. He had captured their attention completely, and now he would give them what they had come for. Each of you dwells in a different realm, he said. Each of you enjoys a different kind of happiness. But all of you, without exception, are subject to the same truths. All of you are subject to impermanence. Whatever arises must cease. Whatever is born must die. Whatever is assembled must eventually disassemble. This is true for the lowest realms and the highest. This is true for the most refined beings and the most crude. Impermanence is the nature of all conditioned existence. The Devas listened. They had heard this teaching before, perhaps in fragments, in pieces. But hearing it now, in the context of their own disputes, it struck them differently. They had been arguing about who was higher, who was more beautiful, who was more blessed. And the Buddha had reminded them that all of their realms, however elevated, were still subject to the same fundamental law. And because all of you are subject to impermanence, the Buddha continued, all of you are subject to suffering. Not the coarse suffering of the lower realms, perhaps, but suffering nonetheless. The suffering of knowing that what you have will not last. The suffering of clinging to existence even as it changes. The suffering of hoping that the happiness you enjoy will continue forever, when you know in your hearts that it cannot. The Buddha paused. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes carrying the weight of infinite compassion. The understanding of one who had seen the truth and wanted nothing more than to share it with all beings. There is a way out of this suffering, he said. There is a way to be free from the cycle of impermanence, from the cycle of grasping and clinging, from the cycle of birth and death. This is what I teach. This is what I offer to any being who is willing to hear it. And then the Buddha taught. He taught about the Four Noble Truths. He spoke about suffering, about its origin in craving, about its cessation in the letting go of craving, and about the path that leads to that cessation. He spoke about the Noble Eightfold Path, about right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He spoke about the nature of the mind, about the causes of suffering and the conditions for its ending. He spoke with the clarity of one who had seen the truth and the compassion of one who wanted all beings to see it as well. The Devas listened, and as they listened, something began to change. The arguing that had consumed them just moments before seemed distant now, irrelevant, like the chatter of children compared to the voice of an adult. They saw clearly how foolish their disputes had been. They had been arguing about the quality of their prisons, as if one prison were better than another, when what mattered was escaping from prison altogether. One by one, as the Buddha's teaching continued, the Devas began to attain. They did not all attain the same level. Some attained the fruit of stream entry, the first stage of liberation, the point at which one enters the path and can never fall back into the lower realms. Others attained higher fruits, the stages of once returning and non-returning, progressing along the path toward full liberation. And some, perhaps those who had been practicing longest, attained the fruit of arahantship, the final liberation, the end of all suffering, the cessation of all fetters. The night deepened. The full moon continued to shine overhead. And in the monastery at Jeta's Grove, celestial beings from every realm sat in the presence of the Buddha and listened to the Dhamma. The arguments had ended, the boasting had ceased. There was only the teaching, the listening, and the transformation that comes when truth is truly heard. When the teaching was finished, the Buddha fell silent. The Devas sat for a moment longer, absorbing what they had received, feeling the change that had come over them. And then one by one, they rose. They bowed to the Buddha, expressing their gratitude, their reverence, their faith, and then they departed, returning to their various realms, carrying the Dhamma back with them to wherever they dwelt. Some returned to the Tāvatimsa heaven. Others returned to the Yama realm, or the Tusita realm, or the Nimanarati realm. They returned to their beautiful gardens, their magnificent palaces, their refined pleasures. But they returned as changed beings. They no longer argued about who was superior. They no longer boasted about their realms. They knew, with the certainty that comes from direct experience, that all realms were temporary, that all pleasures were fleeting, that the only thing that truly mattered was the liberation that the Buddha had taught. The monastery grew quiet once more. The full moon continued to shine. The Buddha sat in his meditation, alone now, at peace. He had given the teaching, and the Devas had received it. What they did with it was up to them. But the seed had been planted, and seeds, given time and conditions, grow. This encounter on the full moon night carries a teaching that is relevant to all of us, whatever realm we may dwell in. We all, in our own ways, argue about our status. We all, in our own ways, boast about our accomplishments, our possessions, our relationships, our understanding. We all, in our own ways, believe that our situation is better than someone else's, that our happiness is more secure, that our life is more meaningful. These beliefs are natural, perhaps, but they are also the source of much suffering. The Buddha's question cuts through all of this. Is any of us free from suffering? If we are honest with ourselves, we must answer no. Not yet. Not as long as we are subject to change, to loss, to the fundamental unsatisfactoriness of existence. The happiness we enjoy is real, but it is not permanent. The life we cherish is precious, but it will not last. And as long as we cling to these things as if they were permanent, as if they could provide lasting security, we will suffer. The Buddha's answer to this suffering is not to abandon happiness or to despise life. It is to see both clearly, to understand their nature, to hold them lightly. When we see clearly that our happiness is impermanent, we can enjoy it without grasping. When we see clearly that our life is precious, we can live it fully without fear. This is the freedom that the Buddha taught. This is the freedom that the Devas discovered on that full moon night. May we, like those Devas, come to see the foolishness of our disputes. May we recognize that arguing about who is better, who is higher, who is more blessed, is a distraction from the only question that truly matters. And may we, through the practice of the Buddha's teaching, find our way to the liberation that is beyond all status, all realms, all claims of superiority. The liberation that is the birthright of every being who is willing to let go. Story 10. The Night of Mahāparinibbāna. The end came quietly, as it always does when the greatest things leave the world. The Buddha was 80 years old. He had spent 45 years walking from place to place, teaching the Dhamma to anyone who would listen, guiding monks and lay people, celestial beings and human beings, along the path that leads from suffering to freedom. He had grown weary. The early texts tell us that his body was tired, that his strength had diminished, that the time of his final departure was near. And so he made his way to a place called Kusinārā, a small town in what is now northern India, and there he prepared to let go. He lay down between two sala trees in a grove that belonged to the Malla clan. The trees were in bloom, though it was not their season to flower. The air was heavy with fragrance. The sky above was clear and deep. And as the night settled over Kusinārā, the Buddha entered the meditation that would carry him beyond the reach of any meditation. But before he did this, before the final moments of his life in the body, something extraordinary happened. From the heavens above, from realms beyond counting, the celestial beings began to arrive. They came not with sound or spectacle, but in silence, each one drawn by a knowledge that the end was near. Devas from the 10 directions made their way toward the grove at Kusinārā, descending through the layers of existence until they reached the human world. They came because they had heard the Buddha teach. They came because they had taken refuge in the Dhamma. They came because they loved him, in the way that beings love one who has shown them the way out of suffering. The first to arrive were the 4 great kings, the guardian deities who watch over the 4 directions of the human world. They had been among the earliest celestial beings to encounter the Buddha's teaching, and they had become devoted followers. They stood at the edges of the grove, watching, waiting, their faces reflecting the grief that was spreading through all the realms. Beyond them came the Devas of the Tāvatimsa heaven, the 33, led by their king Sakka. Sakka had met the Buddha many times over the years. He had asked him questions, received his answers, and gone away changed each time. Now he stood among the sala trees, bowing his head, unable to speak. And beyond Sakka came others. Beyond came the Devas of the Yama heaven, the Tusita heaven, the higher heaven still. Each group arrived in turn, filling the invisible spaces of the grove with their presence. And above them all, in the highest realms, the Brahmās gathered. Among them was Sahampati, the same Brahmā who had once descended from the Brahmā worlds to ask the Buddha to teach. He was there again now, not to request anything, but to witness. The early texts describe a rain of flowers falling from the heavens. These were not ordinary flowers. They were celestial blossoms, rare and radiant, that grew only in the gardens of the Deva realms. They fell in a gentle, endless cascade, covering the Buddha's body, covering the ground around him, covering the monks who sat nearby. The fragrance was extraordinary, the sight beyond anything the human world had ever witnessed. The twin sala trees, which should not have been flowering at all, burst into bloom. Their white petals opened fully, as if the trees themselves were paying homage, as if the whole world was gathering to honor what was about to happen. And through it all, the Buddha lay still. He was aware of everything. He was not unconscious, not unaware. He was fully present, fully conscious, as he prepared to enter the meditation that would take him beyond. He began with the first jhana, the state of joy and pleasure that arises from right concentration. He passed through the second jhana, the third, the fourth. He moved beyond the form realms into the formless realms, passing through states of existence that ordinary practitioners cannot imagine, states of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. And finally, he entered the cessation of perception and feeling, Nirodha Sammapati, the meditative attainment that is the nearest thing to Nibbāna that can be experienced while still alive. It is a state where perception and feeling, the mental processes that create the sense of a separate self, are temporarily suspended. It is deep beyond measure, profound beyond description. For as long as he remained in that attainment, the Buddha was present in the world. And then he emerged. The texts tell us that when he emerged from the cessation, he spoke. But he did not speak to the Devas or to the Brahmās. He spoke to his attendant, the monk Ananda. Ananda had been with the Buddha for decades. He was the Buddha's cousin, the monk who had devoted himself to the Buddha's service, who had memorized thousands of discourses, who had been a witness to the entire span of the Buddha's teaching life. And now, as the night deepened, as celestial flowers fell and the trees bloomed out of season, Ananda heard his teacher's voice once more. "Ananda," the Buddha said, "I am now weary. I have attained my final rest. The time of my final passing is near. Do not be troubled. Do not grieve. Everything that arises must pass away. This is the nature of existence. I have taught you the Dhamma, all that is essential, all that you need for liberation. I have not held anything back. The teaching is complete." But Ananda did grieve, the texts tell us. He wept. He could not accept that the Buddha was leaving, and the Buddha with infinite patience spoke to him one more time. "Ananda, listen to me. All conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Do not cling. Do not sorrow. The time of my Mahāparinibbāna is at hand. I will lie down and go beyond the reach of all conditions. But the Dhamma remains. The teaching remains. Those who practice the teaching will find their way, as I have found mine." Having said this, the Buddha entered the meditation once more. But this time, he did not emerge. The exact moment of the Buddha's passing is described in the early texts with profound simplicity. It is said that his mind, free from all fetters, free from all clinging, released itself from the conditions of body and existence. The aggregates that had constituted his being, the skandhas of form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness, fell away one by one, like a flame that goes out when the oil is exhausted. There was no struggle, no drama. There was only the quiet cessation of one who had completed the work. And the world changed. At the moment of the Buddha's passing, the early texts tell us, the earth shook. 10,000 world systems trembled. In the heavens the Devas cried out, the Brahmās wailed. But it was not a cry of despair. It was the sound of beings confronting a truth they had always known but had never felt so acutely. Everything that is born must die. Everything that is assembled must disassemble. Everything that is conditioned must pass. In the grove at Kusinārā the celestial flowers continued to fall. The sala trees continued to bloom, and the monks who had gathered around the Buddha sat in silence, watching, as the body of their teacher lay still. The Buddha was gone, but the teaching remained. In the days that followed, the Devas from the 10 directions came to pay their respects. They came in their thousands, in their multitudes, each one honoring the Buddha in their own way. Sakka came, Sahampati came, the 4 great kings came, and the Brahmās, who had never before descended to the human world in such numbers, came as well. And then there was a question that had to be answered. What was to be done with the Buddha's body? Ananda, still grief-stricken, but beginning to function, asked the Buddha's instruction. But the Buddha had already given his final teaching on this matter. He had told Ananda that the body of a Tathagata should be treated like the body of a wheel-turning monarch, like the body of a great king. Cremation was the custom. Honor should be shown. Relics should be preserved. And so it was done. The Buddha's body was cremated with the honors due to a universal monarch, and when the fire had done its work, relics remained. They were the remains of one who had burned away all defilement, and even the physical relics were treated with reverence. 8 portions of relics were distributed to the major kingdoms and clans who requested them. Stupas were built to house these relics, places of pilgrimage where beings could come to honor the Buddha's memory. A 9th portion went to the Pava kingdom, a 10th to the Maurya clan. The alms bowl that the Buddha had carried for 45 years was preserved separately, and it too became an object of devotion. The relics were divided, but the teaching was not divided. The Dhamma remained whole, passed from teacher to student, from generation to generation, from the time of the Buddha to our own time, across more than 25 centuries. This is the final teaching of the night of Mahāparinibbāna. The Buddha is gone. The Devas who came to honor him are gone, most of them, to other realms, other lives. The monks who sat by his side have long since passed away, entered Nibbāna, been reborn, or continued their journey through the cycle of existence. Everything that was present on that night at Kusinārā has passed away. And yet we are here. We have heard this story. We know what happened. The teaching is still alive. Liberation is internal. No external being, however powerful, however revered, however celestial, can save another being from the necessity of their own awakening. The Devas came. They honored the Buddha, they bowed and wept and praised, but they could not keep him. They could not prevent the passing. The Buddha entered Nibbāna alone, as all beings must ultimately walk the path alone. This is not a sad story. It is a story of completion, of fulfillment, of a life fully lived and a work fully done. The Buddha did everything he came to do. He taught, he guided, he freed beings from suffering, and when the time came, he let go. May we, when our time comes, let go as gracefully. May we, like the Buddha, complete the work that is ours to complete. And may we, like the Devas of that night, return again and again to the teaching, until the teaching is no longer something external that we follow, but something internal that we are. The Buddha is gone. The Dhamma remains. The path is open. And we are walking. We have traveled far tonight. We have stood beneath the Bodhi tree on the most important night in the history of the world, when a Brahmā descended from the highest realms to ask that the teaching be spoken. We have climbed to the Subdues heaven and watched the Buddha demonstrate, with a single question, the limits of all views and all claims to eternity. We have followed Moggallāna through the air to the Tāvatimsa realm, where celestial beings were searching for protection they did not know how to find. We have sat beside the Buddha as he prepared to let go, as the heavens opened and the Devas came to honor him one last time. We have met Sakka, the Lord of the 33 heavens, seeking happiness beyond all heavens, and discovering that the answer had been within him all along. We have witnessed a Deva saved from despair by the simple truth of impermanence, finding peace not in the avoidance of change, but in the understanding of it. We have seen Sāriputta guide a celestial maiden to freedom through the contemplation of her own body, discovering that liberation is available to any being willing to see clearly. We have listened as a Deva asked the Buddha about the Creator, and found that the most important question was not about origins, but about suffering and its ending. We have followed Sahampati back to the teaching after his own wandering, learning that returning to the path is always possible, always honored, always enough. And we have gathered with celestial beings on a full moon night, watching them argue about status until the Buddha asked the question that silenced them all. Is any of us free from suffering? What connects all of these encounters? What thread runs through all 10 stories, weaving them into a single tapestry? The thread is this. The Buddha's teaching is for all beings. It is not limited to humans, not confined to one realm, not reserved for beings of a particular status or attainment. Devas and Brahmās, kings of the heavens and celestial maidens, beings in the depths of despair and beings lost in the pride of their own accomplishments, all of them have approached the Buddha, and all of them have received what they needed. Not always what they expected. Not always what they wanted, but always what was true. And the second thread is this. Liberation is internal. No external being, however powerful, however celestial, can do the work for us. The Devas came to the Buddha, but they had to listen. They had to practice. They had to see for themselves the nature of their own minds, the impermanence of their own conditions, the suffering that arose from their own clinging. The Buddha could show the way. He could not walk it for them. This is true for celestial beings, and it is true for us. The stories we have heard tonight are ancient. They took place more than 25 centuries ago, in a world that no longer exists in the form it had then. The kingdoms are gone. The monasteries have crumbled. The beings who spoke these words have long since passed to other realms, other lives, other worlds. And yet, the teaching remains. The Dhamma is still alive, still available, still offering its freedom to anyone who is ready to receive it. The Buddha is gone. He entered final Nibbāna on that night at Kusinārā, and he has not returned. The Devas who gathered to honor him have been reborn according to their karma, rising and falling through the realms as all beings do. The monks who sat by his side have walked their own paths, some attaining liberation, others continuing the journey in future lives. Everything that was present in these stories has passed away. And yet, we are here. We have heard these stories. We have sat with them. We have allowed them to work on us in whatever way they work, softening the heart, opening the mind, pointing toward a peace that does not depend on external conditions. This is the gift of the teaching. It does not require us to be in a particular place, at a particular time, in a particular body. It does not require us to be free from suffering before we can begin. It asks only that we listen, that we practice, that we return to the path again and again as many times as necessary. As we close this night, let us take a moment to rest. Let the breath come and go naturally. There is nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to achieve. The stories have been told, the teaching has been given. What remains is simply this, the present moment, the breath, the quiet awareness that is always here, beneath the noise of the world, beneath the restlessness of the mind. May we carry with us the understanding that came through these 10 encounters. May we remember that the teaching is for all beings, including us. May we remember that liberation is internal, that it cannot be given by any external teacher, that it arises when the conditions are right, when the mind is clear, when the heart is open. And may we rest now, in whatever way rest is possible for us, knowing that the path continues, that the practice continues, that the journey continues, and that we are never alone. The Buddha is gone, the Dhamma remains, and we are walking.